So you found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. I'm back for more predictions that evolution has allegedly made and failed. The first two were that there shouldn't be carbon-14 in diamonds or coal. Not only is that not a prediction of evolution, it's actually expected both should have some, and that coal should have more. Don Batten is a PhD botanist and a Creation Ministries international stooge. His best argument last time was that he had an email from an anonymous carbon dating expert that said that he was right. And no, you can't see it. This time, he's going to start out telling us that evolution makes predictions about folded sediment. It doesn't. That would be geology, not biology, but hey, whatever. Why use words to mean anything like what people generally use them to mean, when you could just use them in your own way to confuse everybody? I guess that's enough preamble. Let's get into it.
Well, the prediction is that folded rocks around the world give evidence that they were hard when they were folded.
I mean, is that really a prediction? It seems more like a conclusion. There's no rule that says uplift and folding have to happen only after lithification of rocks. By the way, lithification is the process of turning loose sediments into hard rock. It happens through a combination of squeezing out water and chemical cementing in the grains left behind. It greatly reduces the volume of the sediment and greatly increases its hardness.
Right. Can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Well, if you think about the rock, the deep time idea of rocks being laid down, layer after layer after layer like this, and then you find all around the world radical bending of these rock layers. So clearly all the stuff was laid down before it was folded, before it was bent.
What he's describing there, with sediment being laid down, is Steno's principle of initial horizontality. Now, we know that there are circumstances that can cause diagonal or even vertical deposition, but those circumstances are uncommon and usually short-lived. Generally, sediment is laid down in horizontal layers.
Right.
But the time frame they put on this, again, the millions and billions of years idea, you've got tens and hundreds of millions of years of time laying down these layers before they're bent.
Well, that varies a lot. There's no rule about how long after deposition folding has to start. You need to assess each instance individually because such processes have different causes, start times, intensities, and durations. Nothing in geology is just a one-size-fits-all explanation. Earth is complex, and so are its rocks.
Yes.
In which case, at least the lower layers would have been hard rock at the time they were bent.
Again, this depends, but this is at least often the case.
Yeah, okay. That
So
makes sense.
how do you bend hard rock?
With pressure and heat. Rock is already bendable under standard conditions, but only to a limited degree. The plasticity of rock is a function of pressure and temperature, something we've known since the early 20th century. And when I say we've known, I mean there were experiments that literally bent rock. Don could do those experiments too if he wanted to. He doesn't. He wants to spread lies about the process of plastic deformation. Now, before any creationists get their panties all twisted, let me explain what I mean by a lie as a noun and lying as a verb. When I say that something is a lie, I mean that it is verifiably and demonstrably wrong. For instance, if you say that the Cybertruck will be remembered as a great vehicle in the decades to come, I think that's wrong, but I don't think it's a lie. Since I don't have a way to verify what's going to happen in the future. After all, Allahu Alam. But if you say that a dozen is more than a score, that's a lie. We can just check that answer and find that a dozen is a counting term for 12 and that a score is a counting term for 20. But if you say something that's a lie, that doesn't mean that you're lying as in the verb. At least not how I use it. For me, to lie is to intentionally attempt to deceive a person. Which means that for me to say that you are lying, I have to be convinced that you are attempting to convince a person of something you believe to be false, regardless of its actual falsity. So for example, if you're a flat earther and you try to convince someone that the earth is a globe, you're lying, even if the things you're saying are actually true. On the other hand, if you're the guy telling me that a dozen is more than a score and you actually believe that, you're not lying, you're just mistaken. So when I say that Don is spreading lies, I am not saying that he is lying. Now, I'll be honest, I find it hard to think that he's not lying, but I don't yet have enough evidence to say that with any confidence. Mostly because nothing he's gone over in this series has been about his one field of expertise, the physiology of plants.
I don't know. Can you bend hard rock?
Well,
Yes, you can.
you can bend hard rock if you have enough force,
Okay.
but when you do that, the force is so extreme that it changes the nature of the rock.
This is simply not true under all conditions. Time is also a factor. Let's say it takes 20 seconds to push a wooden box 5 feet across a warehouse floor with 20 newtons of force, the force countering friction, resulting in a steady speed for the box when pushed, and for now ignoring static friction. If you then push with only 10 newtons of force, we should expect that the same trip will take, about 40 seconds, since again we're ignoring static friction for the sake of this example. Now, rock increases its plasticity as temperature and pressure go up, but it doesn't have zero plasticity at any temperature or pressure, which means that it can indeed bend under low pressure and relatively cool temperatures, provided that it is a relatively low force that's applied for a long time. So Don here is saying that rocks can only bend if they're hot enough to become metamorphic rock, but that's simply not true. In fact, we know it can happen slowly, which is why non-metamorphic bent sedimentary strata are actually evidence of the great antiquity of the Earth.
Right, so something becomes something else.
Yeah, so for example, sandstone becomes quartzite, and limestone becomes marble.
Yep, like I said, his argument is that for the rocks to bend, they'd be in conditions that cause them to metamorphose.
And also you get sand grains will be distorted by the force.
That's true.
But it's only true in cases where the rock has actually become metamorphic.
And so you would also expect to find some cracking.
Which we do.
A lot of cracking from the bending of the rock. I mean, you bend hard rock, surely something's going to crack.
Yep.
You don't see much cracking.
Wrong.
In fact, cracking at both the macroscopic scale and the microscopic scale is extremely common in folded sediment that has not undergone metamorphic processes. The only creationist I can find who's doing research on this topic is Andrew Snelling, and the problem is that he just lies. This man has taken low-quality pictures of sedimentary folds in the Grand Canyon and said that they showed no evidence of major stress fractures, but there are people in his photos that are standing in front of the obviously visible stress fractures that even his shitty quality photography can't cover up. And when you check actual high-quality photographs of the same fold, not only do you see the cracks he was hiding, but there are far more smaller stress fractures that cut across the strata. There is no way I can chalk this up to just being a mistake. There is absolutely no explanation I can come up with that is both plausible and results in Andrew Snelling not being a liar. Now, Don here may not know this, since he's not a geologist, but he is at the very least spreading lies. If you disapprove of pretend geologists spreading lies about earth science, then please show me by liking this video and subscribing if you haven't already. Leave a comment letting me know how you feel about people who tell lies about science.
And so what's the other option here then? It had to be soft while bending. Is that more likely?
Well, the prediction is, of course, it was hard when it was bent, in which case it should leave telltale signs it was hard when it was bent.
And it does leave such telltale signs, such as microfractures and cementing agents, abrasion in the sediment grains in folded rock, relatively consistent strata thickness across the bed, and on either leg away from the bend, a lack of milky discoloration from different layers interfacing and partially mingling that you'd get if soft sediment were folding. Now, the degree to which sediment is soft or hard rock is called the level of lithification, and folding can occur at any level of lithification. So it's not like we're in a binary. But also, most folded rock shows that a lot of lithification happened before the folding, often complete lithification.
When you look at it, actually it looks like it was soft when it was bent.
Right.
Sometimes it does, as in this case. And soft folded rocks have a soupy appearance, with few, if any, cracks, significant variation in thickness in the strata, and often a whitish color at the boundary between layers. In contrast, look at this fold from the Carbon Canyon, part of the same rock system that makes up the sides of the Grand Canyon. And conveniently, the fold in the rock that Snelling decided to just lie about.
Foreshadowing as a narrative device.
You can see that this does not look soupy at all, and the rocks have many fractures and cracks, and also that the thickness of the strata is consistent through the folds. All of this indicates that folding must have happened slowly with lithified sediment at a relatively low temperature and pressure because it's not metamorphosed. The rock itself is impossible if young Earth creationism is even a bit true.
And has there been sort of any scientific research done on this?
Why, yes. Yes, there has, by many geologists, and the consensus is that the rocks on their own disprove that the Earth is young.
Yes, indeed. In fact, there's a major fold in the Grand Canyon called the Kaibab Upwarp, where virtually all the layers in the Grand Canyon are radically bent.
There sure is, and it shows every sign of having been a slow process.
Right.
And there's a fold connected with that called the monument fold, very thick layer of rock, it's radically bent.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Andrew Snelling, a geologist.
Andrew Snelling is a geologist the same way Andrew Wakefield is a doctor, or Donald Trump is a good businessman, or that Theranos had a reliable blood testing machine, or that Elon Musk is a guy who can tell the truth, or that Iraq was a country with weapons of mass destruction. I think you get what I mean.
I wanted to do a research project map to check whether it was hard when it was bent or whether it was soft.
Something that had already been checked on extensively and that was not an open question.
And so surely that's not something that's too difficult to get done then? You just go take a sample out?
You don't even need to do that. You can just look at it. Here's a picture of it. It very obviously was not soft when it formed. You can see the consistent thickness of the strata, the lack of mixing, and the ubiquitous fractures all over it. There is no question as to whether it was soft or hard when it formed. It was hard.
That's what she said.
Well, you have to get permission from the Parks Authority to do it.
And what kind of, did he run into some problems then?
He did, indeed. So he applied to the Parks Authority in 2013 to do the research. They refused to let him do it.
Yes, they did, and their stated reason is perfectly reasonable. Basically, they said that there was no reason to do destructive tests on rocks that had been so well characterized already to answer a question no one was asking. This was the correct response. It's the same reason that museums don't let people take apart their fossils to stupidly carbon date them, or that no one would let you tear down their walls just on the off chance that there was an alien body buried in the walls of their house. It was a stupid request to do a stupid bit of research that he just ended up lying about anyway.
They refused to let him get the samples.
They didn't let him get any samples.
No.
They didn't want him testing that.
No.
Which in retrospect was even more obviously the right decision. Look, the US Parks Department is in charge of the national parks. And if I can say one good thing about the former United States, it's that it has some of the best national parks on the planet. One of the most important jobs of the department is to balance the need for preservation of the parks with the need for scientific investigation. Most science involves destruction on some level. If everyone who wanted to take samples from the rocks of the Grand Canyon got to do so, then the natural landscape would just turn into a quarry. So they have to choose who to let take samples as to minimize the damage, but maximize the science. As a result, proposals that are seeking to damage the parks for trivial reasons, or answer questions that already have known answers, are generally rejected, as they should be. Andrew Snelling was proposing just this kind of study. Essentially, he was asking to come into the park and vandalize it, for no good reason.
That's not very open-minded of science there.
No, it's not very open-minded at all.
Yes, it is. If he had proposed to do work that actually answered real questions, even possibly, he'd have been given permission, as he had been in the past. Further, it's not science with a capital S that rejected him. It was the United States government, an organization which does not control science, and which routinely bends over backwards to accommodate even dangerous bullshit from Christian groups, including letting them cause outbreaks of deadly diseases, and even letting them just be in charge of what used to be the House of Representatives, back when the United States still had a constitution it was bothering to follow in any meaningful way.
And so, did he end up actually getting the sample then?
He did, and you'll never guess how.
Well, he did, but only after legal action. So a group that defends religious freedom in the United States, which is guaranteed under their constitution, sued the National Parks Authority for permission. It said there's viewpoint discrimination. You know, it's discriminating against somebody on the basis of their religious beliefs, and that's illegal under the US Constitution.
Yep, the government decided to settle the matter and allow the research rather than deal with the hassle that comes anytime Christians are denied anything. Even things they absolutely should not be granted, like full access to vandalized national parks, or exemptions from basic public safety rules. Because far from being the most oppressed group in the former United States, Christians are so privileged that they got to destroy that country, and most people didn't even notice. Because when Christians get what they want but do not deserve, that's basically just routine. Unless, of course, you're the wrong kind of Christian. Like Christians in historically black denominations. Or Christians whose homelands are in the areas that the United States decided to just blow the fuck up.
Okay, so he got some samples after legal action.
After 4 years after he initially applied, in 2017, he took the samples.
It's a long time to wait. And what did he find? Did he was able to do some of the tests, and what was the evidence?
The evidence was that the fold is full of microfractures, wear on grains at microfracture sites, the strata thickness varied on it minutely, and there was no significant mixing of the strata at the boundaries between them. Then Snelling just lied and said that all of that was evidence that the strata were soft when folded. I mean, obviously, there's more to it than that, but that's the gist of it. One group of people who have no more than the expected number of microfractures are my patrons on Patreon. YouTube earnings fluctuate wildly, and it's not always easy to predict what they'll be. As of writing this, the only reason I know that I'll be in the black next month is because of Patreon. If you value what I do and you want to keep me doing it, and importantly, can afford it, then please consider joining my Patreon. It starts at only $1 a month, you can get a 15% discount if you join with an annual subscription, and you get early access to videos like this, often more than 5 months in advance. You can get access to my super secret Discord server, and at higher tiers, there's even more perks. So help a dino out, if you can.
Yeah, well, I think the Parks Authority people realised that if you did the research, it would probably not be in favour of their view about how long everything took to form.
Hey, this is for everyone who ever told me that young Earth creationism isn't a conspiracy theory. Y'all can go f*** yourselves. Batten just made up a conspiracy theory to hide the age of the Earth on the part of the National Park Service.
And that's what he found.
It's really not, though.
It's a major research project where he looked at the samples under a geological microscope, where you can look at things like, were the sand grains distorted? And was there any metamorphosis, in other words, changing of sandstone into quartzite or anything like that?
And there was not, further emphasizing that this formation had to form through steady folding over millions of years after all the rock had been deposited and lithified. I can't stress this enough. Snelling found conclusive evidence that debunked his entire view of Earth's prehistoric past and just said, yeah, but that just proves I'm right anyway.
And lots of other checks as well, but everything that he looked at said this stuff was soft when it was bent.
By everything, he means literally nothing. And look, geologists recognize that some bending occurs when the rock isn't rock yet, and it's still soft. So it's not like this is a phenomenon that no one knows how to recognize. It has very well described and not very easy to miss characteristics. The problem is that Snelling, and by virtue of just being his meat puppet, Dawn here, has excluded an explanation. You see, a layer can bend quickly when soft, quickly when hard, or slowly when hard. You might wonder about slowly when soft, and the problem there is that the process of lithification is such that the rock will likely harden before much slow bending can occur, and it would also be hard to distinguish from the more likely fast bending. The rock is not compatible with either of the explanations that Snelling finds acceptable, so he has to stuff all the evidence into the only 2 boxes that his dogma will allow. He chose fast and soft, possibly because it's easier to lie about the fractures, often microscopic ones, than it is to lie about metamorphism, since the rock clearly isn't metamorphic, and no one has ever really called it metamorphic. What has actually happened is that Snelling studied rocks that completely disprove his dogma, but since his dogma is definitionally not open to change on the basis of evidence, he doesn't care.
Wow.
What do you mean, wow? A known liar went and vandalized a national park, then lied about his findings, all in service to a conclusion he already reached despite the evidence. Which we know because he'd already been lying about this kind of thing for years. The only wild thing is that this was allowed to happen in the first place, which it never should have been.
So they kind of knew that this might not be a favourable move for their beliefs of how it was created.
No, they knew it wouldn't matter, and it didn't. Andrew Snelling is a known entity. He's a well-known liar, and no steward of any natural landscape should let him collect anything, because he'll just destroy a part of that landscape in an effort to lie, and on top of that, he publishes his lies in a pretend journal that he himself edits. Yeah, you heard that right. His so-called peer-reviewed papers are primarily published in his own publication. That means it's impossible for there to be peer review, because on the one hand, he has final say over whether papers are published regardless of the reviewer responses. And further, anyone who would recommend against publishing his papers would themselves risk his ire, and so risk being barred from publishing. And in the world of faux journals that cater to young Earth creationists, it's not like there are a whole plethora of options. Andrew Snelling is the kind of guy who, if he tells you that the sky is blue, you might want to go check.
It sort of looks like
proven
they
wrong.
didn't want the research done because they suspected it might not be in favour of their millions of years story.
Does it look like that? Not from where I'm sitting, because as it turns out, nothing he found was a problem for science, and what it actually was a problem for flood geology. But of course, Andy there lied about that. But hey, why not just fly into paranoid conspiracy theories the moment someone bars you from vandalizing a national park so you can lie for Jesus?
And so what does that actually mean for the millions of years stories then?
Nothing, because if Snelling were right, it would just mean that rocks fold before lithification more often than we thought. That's it. It wouldn't change the rate of lithification, it wouldn't do a damn thing to radiometric dating, ice core dating, dendrochronology, electron resonance spin dating, sedimentation rates, racemization dating, etc. All of which indicate that the world is many times older than even the oldest estimate given by young Earth creationists.
Well, that fold represents 480 million years of evolutionary time. In other words, the time between the bottom layer being laid down and the top layer being laid down between the bottom layer laid down and the folding, 480 million years.
Right.
I'm not going to check into numbers on that because I can't imagine how they'd matter.
And if
If
not
that
the
was
case,
all soft when it was bent, it eliminates nearly 500 million years of evolutionary time.
so again, we're losing millions of years.
We're losing substantial slabs of deep time.
Maybe if Snelling weren't lying about this, but he is, so we haven't lost a single year of deep time.
In fact, if you think about the Phanerozoic, which is the fossil-bearing strata,
Nope, there are pre-Phanerozoic fossils. The Ediacaran period is before the Phanerozoic. The Phanerozoic starts with the Cambrian and runs until today, but we have older fossils.
it's a section of the geologic column that has fossils, a lot of fossils in it, Phanerozoic. It's supposed to be 541 million years, according to radiometric dating.
Yes. Okay.
And this research wipes out 90% of that time.
Probably what motivated Snelling to lie about it in the first place. But also, does it? Because it seems to me like, at best, even if Snelling were right, it would only wipe out some of the time. Because it would mean that the deposition and folding were rapid, but also could have occurred a very long time ago, into deep time.
So that might have had to have been created pretty soon and pretty quickly as well.
I don't know what that he's referring to.
Well, it indicates that it was laid down very quickly and bent before it could become hard. So it was laid down very quickly and bent before it could become hard, which compresses all that time into a very short time.
Aw, man. I was hoping he'd repeat himself a third time. You know, for the comedic rule of 3. Also, what's with you humans loving prime numbers? You know they have the fewest possible factors, right? I want more factors. Factors are great. Think about how many ways you can divide 7 of something into whole numbers. It's 2. Just 2 ways. But 6 of something, you can divide evenly by 1, 2, 3, and 6. That's 4 ways. But you go for 12, and now you're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. That's 6 whole factors. That's why dozens are so cool. And even though you've mostly gone with the vastly inferior decimal system, you still often buy things by the dozen or even great dozen or gross. All of that is base 12.
People are very strange these days.
It's consistent with the material being laid down during Noah's flood very quickly over the year of the flood.
The Carbon Canyon Fold is part of the Tonto group of the Grand Canyon, and specifically, it is primarily composed of sandstone, the Tapete sandstone. There is only one thing you need to know about the Tapete sandstone to know that it was not a flood deposit. It has fossilized burrows. Flood deposits destroy such traces, and yet, there they are. Further, it has cross-bedding consistent with shallow marine deposition as well as intertidal deposition. It was a beach and a seafloor near the beach. Nothing about it, aside from the occasional conglomeration of larger stones, could even vaguely be interpreted as indicating a flood deposition. Above this is shale, the Bright Angel shale, which cannot deposit without flocculation in a flood, and guess what? No one has ever reported finding floccules in the Bright Angel shale. Although I'm expecting that any day now, Snelling or one of his stooges that he calls students will go and further vandalize the Grand Canyon in an effort to lie about that too. Every single last thing we know about the Tonto group, including the characteristic of folded rocks in it, absolutely precludes or fails to support a global flood ever having occurred. Never mind being the cause of the formation's deposition in the first place.
And then the bending occurred near the end of the flood or soon after the flood with the tectonic forces and things which were operating on the Earth at the time.
Except that would result in uneven thickness in the strata, mixing at the margins of the strata, a relative lack of grain abrasion, and the absence of both large-scale brittle fractures as well as microscopic fractures associated with the deformation of solid rock. The fold in question is the opposite of all that. So let's talk about sedimentary rocks. If you think back to your earth science class in school, you probably learned about the three main types of rock. Igneous, formed by volcanic action; metamorphic, formed from the transformation of other rocks by heat and pressure; and sedimentary, formed by the deposition and later hardening of small grains from other rocks, and the rocks in which we normally find fossils, as well as the rocks that we're talking about right now. We are going to use sandstone as our example for this. Sandstone is made of sand grains, which are particles normally of silicate minerals that are between 0.06 millimeters and 2 millimeters in diameter. Sand is the result of the weathering of rocks, and is typically transported by wind, water, or both. Once it has been deposited, dissolved chemicals such as calcite, quartz, silica, and others build up and lock the grains in place in a process called lithification. When a layer of sand is under differential pressure which will cause it to fold, different things will happen depending on whether and how much it has lithified. Let's start with the easy case. The sand is not bound by a cementing agent, and so the grains can easily move relative to each other and any confining rocks. In this case, the sand will move away from areas of high pressure into areas of low pressure, just like you can see if you were to squeeze a balloon in a few different areas. Also, there will be few, if any, instances where the sand grains chip each other since they're free to move, and there will be few, if any, fractures, since the whole of the sand deposit is not brittle at this point on scales larger than individual grains. This is not exactly rocket science. You can see what I mean if you just fill a plastic bag with wet sand and push it around. Squeeze a couple parts and push them in different directions. You'll see what I mean about no fractures and different thicknesses of the sand deposit. Really, next time you're at a sandy beach, bring a plastic shopping bag or something, fill it with wet but not dripping sand, and manipulate it. Just make sure you don't leave the bag behind, since it's a hazard to wildlife in the area, especially if you live in a place with sea turtles who feed on sea jellies, and may mistake the bag for prey. So let's look at the other scenario, where the sand is bound together by crystals of some substance, perhaps calcite, which locks the grains in place relative to each other. Well, rock is famously strong under compression, which is why it's such a great building material. So the first thing to note is that the lithified sandstone under pressure will not be able to flow away from areas of greater pressure to lower pressure like a still soft sandy mix would be able to. As a result, the pressure causes cracks, mostly small ones, but sometimes large ones, and each one allows the rock to shift a bit to relieve that pressure. At a microscopic scale, these microfractures cause grains at the boundaries of the rocks to move past each other, causing extra wear on the grains themselves. These fractures will be all over the rock, as will the additional grain abrasion. Now, lithification isn't a binary state, and the degree to which a deposit of sand or other sediment will fit neatly into one of the above categories will vary on a spectrum. But what that means is that it's not beyond science to figure out the degree of lithification a stratum had experienced before it folded.
Right.
Whenever he says anything, you say, right, Brett. You know that?
Right.
And so this sort of research that's done, it's genuine research.
I struggle to imagine a way in which research could be less genuine than this.
How was that received by the mainstream sort of research and science community?
It mostly wasn't, because it wasn't really published anywhere where real scientists would likely even notice it, unless they're weirdos, like us and the science friends, who have been following this nonsense as a special interest of ours. For everyone else, this was basically a fart in a hurricane. It means nothing other than that grifting pseudoscientists continue to grift. I mean, that ark won't build itself, nor will the Tower of Babel recreation, and while Snelling's work doesn't directly bring in money, what it does do is provide a thin veneer of apparent intellectual rigor and academic value to answers in Genesis. And that they can use to bolster their begging for money from other Christians, notably including Christian nationalist neo-fascists, whom they have also hosted at the Ark Encounter for a conference. So yeah, Andrew Snelling vandalizing national parks is ultimately part of an openly stated agenda to take over what's left of the United States in an effort to enshrine white supremacy, theocracy, and the erasure of LGBTQ+ people. So not only is he a liar, he is in fact part of the machine that's trying to kill you if you're watching this and you're anything other than a cis-het white Christian male. But only the right kind of Christian, mind you. If you're Orthodox or Catholic, you're only going to be tolerated until they no longer need you. Then you'll be dumped in with all the Muslims they fearmonger about.
Well, the fact he was refused permission to do the research shows you it's not popular.
No.
It's not popular.
Yeah, vandalism of national parks is generally frowned upon, and as someone who likes national parks, I can see why.
But the deep time idea is so entrenched that people just, they shake their eye, well, there must be some explanation.
Yeah.
A couple things. One, the deep time idea is entrenched for the same reason gravity is entrenched in physics. It's called overwhelming evidence and no viable alternative. Second, there's nothing to explain because Snelling lied. I don't have to explain why I still believe in gravity after someone decided to use obvious VFX to fake a levitating rock. I just don't have to point out that it's fake. It's the same thing here. Everything that Snelling concluded about the fold in question in no way supports his conclusion, and he knows that, and he's lied before, and I have to believe that unless he dies before this video comes out, he'll lie again.
Yeah.
There must be some explanation, but there isn't.
There is. The explanation is that nothing that Snelling reported in any way challenges anything in the consensus view of either that fold or rock folding in general. In fact, he found excellent evidence against his own position, and then just pretended it was actually evidence for his position. It's a textbook case of pseudoscientific reasoning, and I put reasoning here in about as many scare quotes as I possibly can.
There isn't an explanation.
That is, again, a very interesting topic to dive into, and there's no real answer we've got so far from other scientists.
Well, it completely contradicts their expectations, which is a seriously failed prediction.
Seriously failed prediction.
I'd love one specific thing that was a prediction that failed. Because let's remember, the prediction that he said failed is that there should be metamorphic transformation in rocks that folded while lithified. Except that that's not a prediction. That's a straw man. So I guess congrats on defeating a straw man that no geologist has supported as near as I can tell. But just like if I said that Christianity is wrong because Jesus coming back as a zombie would have started a zombie plague, and it didn't, it's the kind of thing I'd expect Christians to reject without even thinking about it. That's what scientists do with this kind of dishonest nonsense.
Well, we're on a roll here. We've got 3 failed predictions down.
All of which were less failed predictions of science, and more failed predictions of a straw man version of science that Don here made up himself. Or that was made up for him by other charlatans, like Andrew Snelling. So we're on a roll, but it's a roll of abject failure.
Up to number 4, you mentioned a word, bioturbation.
Oh hey, that's the thing that the Tapete sandstone is full of that shows that it categorically was not a flood deposit. I bet he'll lie about this too. But you know who would never lie about the Tapete sandstone? That's right, my channel members. The join button is right below this video, and the memberships start at just $1.99 a month. Joining gives you access to some members-only videos, early access to all my scripted videos like this, as well as membership in my supporters-only Discord. You also get a green name and channel badge in chat, as well as access to my channel emojis, all of which can be used during live streams or during premieres.
What is bioturbation?
Yeah, that's a mouthful, but it's basically the stirring up that occurs with creatures that live on the seafloor or on the lake floor.
Or the forest floor, or the desert floor, or whatever. But I forgot that creationists pretend that non-aqueous sedimentary rock doesn't exist. Oops.
Things like pippies. I have a fossil of one here.
Is Pippi like Australian for clam? If you're Australian, and I know I have Australian viewers, please let me know what that word means in America speak, because I'm not up on all the down under vocab.
So this is a fossil of a bivalve. It tells its own story, but we won't go there. But these things, if you've been fishing, I believe.
I've been fishing a couple of times. I'm not an avid fisher, but I've done it.
I too have gone fishing a few times. I'm not particularly good at it, but I've done it.
But you've done the thing on the beach with your toes and you dig into the sand and get these pippies out?
I've dug for clams with a shovel. Does that count?
Not with my toes, but yeah, we've got some pippies along the way.
Well, you can do them with your toes. You get there and you wiggle your toes into the thing and you can feel them with your toes.
For fuck's sake, Don, no one cares about your foot fetish. What the hell is your point?
So these things, if you don't grab them quickly, they burrow back into the sand really quickly.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens with the tides and everything, they come up out of the sand to feed and they go back into the sand. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of other creatures like this that stir up the sand.
That's true.
There's worms and all sorts of shellfish and things that stir up the sand. And these things have been in the fossil record all the way back to the bottom of the so-called Phanerozoic, which is all the fossil-bearing strata.
Nope, bivalves do not go all the way back to the beginning of the Cambrian. They don't show up for tens of millions of years, and they are preceded by obvious transitional forms like Halkieria, which has clam-like shells on either end of its body. Worms show up before the Cambrian and are themselves preceded by what seem like stem bilaterians, things like Dickinsonia, which are almost, but not quite, bilaterally symmetrical. Don wants you to believe the lie that all these forms arise in the Cambrian all of a sudden without any plausible evolutionary transitions. But that's not true.
So if you're laying down sediment, sand, silt, and mud depositing on a seafloor or a lake floor, these creatures are stirring it up all the time.
Yeah, which is why much of sedimentary rock from the Phanerozoic contains bioturbation, including the Depite sandstone, of the previous so-called failed prediction.
Right. And
Now the prediction is...
I was actually about to ask that. What is the prediction here then? We know what bioturbation is, and we know they're busy disturbing sediment on the seafloor. What does that actually mean? What is the prediction here?
The thing is that if the sediments were laid down over the time frame they claim...
Which they were.
There's such a small amount of sediment each year that it would all be stirred up.
No, the prediction is not that it would all be stirred up. You can go to a modern location where sediment is depositing where organisms live and notice that it's not all stirred up. Look, here's a clip of someone looking at sand being deposited with bands of different color sediment in the modern day. You can tell it's modern day because if it wasn't, then how the f*** would there be footage of it?
See this black sand seam? It was created when this river flooded last night. I guarantee you there is going to be a lot of gold sitting in with this heavy black sand. I'm going to drop a quick test in it and show you guys the result.
See that? There's structures in there. Now, for a group that likes to whine eternally about uniformitarian assumptions, you'd think that they would recognize that according to uniformitarianism, if not all sediment has all structure erased by bioturbation today, that would also be the case in the past. And so the actual prediction would be that we find bioturbation all over the geological record, but not everywhere in the geological record. Once again, this prediction is just a straw man.
Right.
So there'd be no structure in the rock.
At all. So it would all be stirred up by these pippies and whatnot, coming up for feeding, going down, stirring up all the sediment, and that wouldn't actually have nice formations of rock.
No nice. Everybody's seen, through road cuttings and things like that, you see the layers in the rock and that sort of thing.
Yeah, things that we still see happening today. While life is basically everywhere on Earth, even deep underground, big organisms that can actually disturb things like varves, cross-bedding, and such internal structures are not everywhere. But bioturbation is found all over the place in the fossil record, including the stratum we already spent the first part of this video talking about. Yet bioturbation can be observed all the way back to the Cambrian and even just before. So far from a failed prediction of science, this is a failed prediction of flood geology, like all predictions of flood geology. Also, why do I feel like this too is going to depend on some bullshit that Andrew's never told the truth Snelling made up? I hope not, but I don't know. I respond to these as I go.
And a lot of them are horizontal, sometimes bent, but you see the layers in the rock. And the layers wouldn't be there, they'd be all stirred up.
Wrong, 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 wrong.
In fact, experiments have been done with these creatures, and within an hour or so, they stir up a depth of 100 millimetres, 10 centimetres, 4 inches, within an hour or so, is stirred up.
Well, we're back to the old tactic that Batten loves of just claiming that something has been done in science that may support him without telling us what we need to know to actually find the source on this and see who did this, with what organisms, what substrate, what their findings were, etc. Instead, the guy who just spouted a bunch of obvious lies from one of the most obvious liars in all of creationism is just asking us to trust him, bro. Well, in point of fact, I do not trust him. I can't imagine a world in which I'd trust a creationist PhD on anything. Further, let's just take this report at face value. So they determined a rate at which animals, on average, burrow into sediment. But animals don't just keep digging. Batten himself, when he was talking about what I still presume are clams, pointed out that they burrow up to feed. They have to stay close enough to the surface to get oxygen and food, so they bury themselves enough to be relatively safe from predators, but not so deep that they suffocate or starve. Which means that if animals that cause bioturbation colonize a location, they're not going to remove all the structure underlying them, even if it is unlithified. And again, we can see this both today and in the stones we've been talking about, because remember, the Depite sandstone that Snelling is so in love with when he vandalized it has both bioturbation and obvious crossbedding, And just as a further reminder, the presence of bioturbation and ichnofossils at all preclude a flood as an explanation.
Right. And how much sediment is expected with the old sort of idea? How much sediment has to be laid there and stay there?
What is he even asking? If you're watching this after the premiere, pause. Let me know what you think he's asking in the comments. But I'll be damned if I know.
Well, if you divide the thickness of the Phanerozoic, which is about two kilometres, that's the fossil-bearing strata.
Jesus Christ, if he decides that he's just going to divide the thickness that he just made up by the duration of the Phanerozoic to present, and then use an average deposition rate derived from that to calculate the length of time it took for some stratum to deposit based on its individual thickness, I'm going to lose my goddamn mind.
Yeah.
And they say it's 541 million years. Get your calculator out.
He's going to do it, isn't he? God damn it, I hate this so much. You know, this video was actually a request from my comments. If you requested this, I hope you did it because you wanted me to suffer. Because boy am I suffering now.
Divide 2 kilometres by 541 million years.
Okay.
The answer is 0.004 millimetres per year of sediment.
That has to be laid and undisturbed.
Audience, I'm going to talk to Donnie here. Just in case he ever watches this. And if I'm being honest, so I can use second-person pronouns, because for this bit, I kind of have to. If this isn't your kind of thing and your name isn't Don Batten, feel free to skip to this timestamp when I'll have gone back to addressing the rest of you, rather than this sack of shit. Okay, Donnie, listen up, you mendacious skid mark. What you just did might be one of the stupidest things I have ever seen outside of a Roger Spur or Matt Nyler video. And if you know who the hell those are, you know how dumb this is. You just divided the total depth of the Phanerozoic, which isn't even something that you can just calculate, because there is no one depth for it, it varies, and you divided it by the number of years it has existed to get a sedimentation rate. Let's look at why that's so dumb. I wonder how you managed to take a piss in the morning without falling into the toilet and drowning. First of all, in order to take unconsolidated sediment and turn it into rock, the overall process has two basic parts: compaction and cementation. Compaction is kind of like what happened to you when your shit got so hard and unable to pass that it filled up your whole digestive system and then backed into your brain, explaining why everything you say is so full of shit and why you're such a shit for brains moron. As you might be able to tell from the word itself, if you knew any Latin, compaction is the process by which pressure causes the grains in a sedimentary deposit to go closer together. This reduces the overall thickness of the sedimentary layer by an order of magnitude or even more in most cases. So already you can't simply do this math, even if you could come up with a meaningful estimate for how thick the Phanerozoic is. Next, this requires that there have been no period of net erosion, which I suspect is only possible because you think that weathering erosion don't happen. Probably because someone eroded your brain with sandpaper. In fact, we know that most of the sediment from the Phanerozoic is gone. So there's a second reason that your math is dumb. Third, we can just measure sedimentation rates. They're not 0.004 millimeters per year in most places. In most places, they're much higher or they're negative. So no one thinks that there was a sustained 0.004 millimeter per year deposition rate for about 600 million years. Each stratum, hell, each lamina, will have its own deposition rate, which may be higher or lower than 0.004. Fourth, for this to make sense, even if the previous points weren't true, it would have to be the case that macroscopic animals always colonize every sedimentary environment as soon as it forms without giving it time to accumulate sediment free of bioturbation. You, of all people, should know that that isn't how that works, given that apparently your neurons didn't have time to colonize the whole of your goddamn brain case. Don, if you watch this, I want you to comment on this video or email me at the.dapper.dino.yt@gmail.com and tell me, are you just stupid or are you lying? Because it's getting harder and harder to think that these absolutely brain-dead takes are just a result of you being ignorant. Hell, if you're not, Don, let me know what you think in the comments, because I think we're getting to the inevitable point in any video about creationists, PhDs, where I come to the unavoidable conclusion that they're just liars.
Well, and it's a tenth of the thickness of a sheet of paper per year.
Which you would think might be a clue that that's a dumb take, and probably that the math that went into the estimate is wrong in some way. This is one of the most basic things you can do in science or engineering after you've done some math. You look at that math and check if it even makes a lick of sense. If it doesn't, then either you've done the math wrong or your assumptions are wrong. Don apparently never learned about this, or more likely decided to ignore it. Because at this point, are we really going to keep pretending that there's a snowball's chance in Phoenix that he's doing this in good faith?
And we can already see that these pippies and whatnot are already stirring up more than that in an hour.
That's correct. They're stirring up much more than that in an hour.
Which again, combined with the fact that we have current sediment that has not had its structure destroyed by bioturbation, shows that this estimate is stupid. Combine that with the fact that we have sediments in the fossil record with both preserved structure and bioturbation, the latter of which would have been destroyed by a flood, mind you, and you can start to see why not only is this not a failed prediction, it's more of a reason to think that Don Batten is either so stupid he wouldn't realize he poured mayonnaise on his breakfast cereal instead of milk, or he's just a f***ing liar. Again, you tell me which it is, although I think you can tell which way I'm leaning today.
So, in other words, to get structure in the rock, there must be much more than 100 millimetres per hour deposited to actually not get the stirring up.
No, because yet again, animals do not always colonize sediment immediately, and they do not just dig around continuously in the substrate. They stop, which again, you can just see by going outside and digging a bit. You, sitting there on the toilet or folding your clothes or using this as background noise while you game. Yes, you, Brenda. I'm talking to you specifically. Go outside and look for some loose sediment. Dig into it. See if it has bioturbation all the way down. I bet it won't. So why should we expect that if that sediment lithifies in the future, that all that structure will go away? We shouldn't, because it won't.
Right, and we don't see that at all.
No. In fact, two scientists, Dr. Leonard Brand and Dr. Art Chadwick in the United States.
Those aren't scientists. They're more vandals who have the advantage of having a wrongfully accredited creationist cult-backed school, Loma Linda University, behind them. In case you're wondering which cult, it's the Seventh-day Adventists. You know, the ones who, at least in some instances, think that CERN was created by Satan to build a bomb to nuke God in heaven. Because that's a thing they think is possible, I guess. Yeah, that's who we're trusting now, or at least who Batten wants us to trust.
Did a major study of this, and they looked at the rock layers between the Cambrian and the Eocene. That's sort of basically the whole thing in Utah and Arizona in the United States, which has been well studied rock-wise. You know, there's been a lot of study done by all sorts of geologists on this.
Yep, and you know what all those other studies have in common? They didn't seem to notice any particular lack of expected bioturbation. But of course, if you just lie about how much bioturbation there should be by vastly overestimating it, then suddenly it's really easy to say that there isn't enough. Just like it's really easy to lie to yourself about how much pizza you should eat, and then eat too much of it. I don't know, that was probably a bad analogy, but I'm pissed and I kind of wish I had pizza. I like pizza. It makes me happy when times are sad. You'll never know, dear, how much I love pizza. Oh, please don't take my pizza away.
Mm-hmm. And they looked at they graded the bioturbation. They had a scale of 1 to 5.
Pro tip, if you want your lies about science to seem more plausible, add more numbers.
And they graded the bioturbation, no bioturbation through to heavily bioturbated, in other words, all stirred up and no structure, versus, no stirring.
Mm-hmm. And let's remember that since floods characteristically erase bioturbation, there should have been no bioturbation at all.
And almost all of it was unstirred. There's just very little that's actually stirred up.
But some of it was, so it wasn't a flood then. Cool. Thanks to Chadwick and Powell for confirming that Noah's flood didn't cause any of the Phanerozoic rocks in the Midwest of the former United States.
So what would have to happen for this to actually be the case, for what we see to have an explanation if these pippies and things are stirring it all up?
Nothing would have to happen. Just like the previous two so-called failed predictions that weren't predictions at all. Just straw men. There's nothing that needs explaining here. The level of bioturbation is both perfectly in line with what we see today and what we'd expect to see in the past, and completely incompatible with a young Earth and flood geology. Do you think that Don knows that he's allowed to target things other than his own foot when he goes shooting? It doesn't seem like it.
Well, there's no explanation other than the fact that time is fictional.
Yep, you heard him. He just said that time is fictional. Well, I guess that means it's time for...
Time exists.
Thanks, Chesh.
Right.
The amount of time is fictional. So the go-to is, there's been a period of rapid sedimentation, and that's where we get the structure.
Yeah.
And then there's periods where there's nothing happening.
Wow. You mean like what happens all over the place on Earth? What a crazy supposition. What's next? Will they presume that gravity existed in the past? Or maybe that electrons did? What will these goofy evolutionists come up with next? I mean, continuity in natural processes? How silly of them. We all know that in the past, things just happened, randomly, for no reason, with no explanation. Then today happened, and suddenly reality settled down, also for no reason. That's why there's no point in investigating past events, because really, is the past even real? I mean, we've already heard that time is fictional, so who cares, right? There was no past, and there will be no future. There is only the eternal now. So subscribe to my Patreon for infinite money over no duration, because everything is made up anyway. Also, if you actually could look into my Patreon, it would help a lot. This is a very volatile job, and the extra stability would help me to be more able to budget and plan, and maybe even be able to spend more on video production. Thanks.
And that's where the time is, you see. It's in the gaps. That's the idea.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's how time and erosion work. Saying it like you're whispering gossip to your high school girlfriends doesn't change that if sediment is not on net deposited or on net eroded, then time won't be represented by later rocks. That's just how basic logic works. Events follow one after the other in an order. Erosion is an event. It takes time. If it happens, then you won't have that event present and represented by rock. Welcome to reality. Enjoy your stay. It increasingly sucks here. And for the most part, that's because of people like Don Batten. So that's fun.
So that was a popular idea, but this study showed that there's actually no gaps, because...
No, it didn't.
If you had gaps in time, you'd have bioturbation. You'd have no structure.
Unless the bioturbation is one of the things that fucking eroded away. And also, regardless of erosion, you wouldn't have any in a flood. And yet we do. Can you tell that Don is pissing me off? Is that coming through? Because if it's not, then I want you to know that he is. And really, he should be doing that to you too. Anyone getting science and just basic how time works this wrong should be an insult to you as a fellow thinking being.
But there's structure almost all the way through it, so there's no gaps.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.
There's no periods of quiescence, no periods of long time where hardly anything's happening.
Right, and so does that mean there had to be rapid time, like this would have to have occurred rapidly?
No, it physically couldn't have in most cases. But hey, let's hear whatever lie Donnie is going to tell about it.
The whole lot has to be deposited really rapidly in quick time, otherwise you'd have it all stirred up.
Oh, right, okay.
I don't know if you can tell, but this is getting so exhausting, and I've already covered it in so much detail that I'm losing the will to even speak, and I'm regressing into memes.
It's like, again, Noah's flood explains the formation of these layers in quick time.
No, it doesn't. Not only is a flood physically incapable of producing most of the structure that Don is so keen to point out hasn't been erased by bioturbation, but it also would preclude what bioturbation we do have. So that's a double preclusion of the flood. And no, a few cultists with petrology hammers haven't changed that.
And, by the way, the pipi, or the bivalve here, when it's fossilized, is intact.
Yeah.
When you find these shells on the beach, you just find half of it.
Yeah.
Because when they die, the little muscle inside that holds it together, it falls apart.
Okay.
I have talked about this more times than there are grains of sand on the beach or stars in the sky. I'm skipping it. We all know that most fossils are formed in rapid deposition. That's not the same as Noah's flood, even if it was a flood. There being a flood somewhere at some time does not mean that there was a flood everywhere at the same time. You can tell because floods happen today, and most people aren't in the flood, even though some people are. Oh, but I guess that assumes that events actually occur in time, which I guess maybe I shouldn't. Oh, and also clams live buried down, so if they die while burrowed, they can't open their shells.
So the bioturbation study, it really eliminates this huge amount of time.
Well, only in the sense that lies are truth, war is peace, and slavery is freedom.
It says that the time frame that they've given for all this sedimentation is just wrong by many orders of magnitude. I mean, like 100 million times wrong.
Wow, how convenient. A paper that says, no, we're not wrong by 8 orders of magnitude, you are. This paper might as well have just said, I know you are, but what am I, over and over for 3 pages for all the good it did the creationist cause.
Right. Okay.
That sort of order of magnitude, because
it's conveniently the number of orders of magnitude that young Earth creationism is wrong by. And so to be right, they have to find out that you isn't just a petulant whine, it's actually true.
From 0.004 millimeters per year.
Which is an estimate so stupid it's hard to see how anyone could use it who isn't lying. Seriously, it's like measuring the distance from where someone was born to where they died, then dividing that by how long they lived, and assuming that that's how fast they walked. In fact, let's do it. Duane Gish of Gish Gallop fame was born in White City, Kansas, and he died in San Diego, California. That's 1,218 miles. I'm using miles since he was un-American, and Americans would rather die than use the metric system. He was born on February 17, 1921, and died on March 5, 2013. That's 33,620 days. Of course, this means that he spent his entire life walking at the blistering pace of 15 inches per minute from the place he was born to where he died. I mean, that must be what happened, right? That's the distance from where he started to where he ended, and that's how long it took him to start and end. So of course that's what his whole life was. Yeah, if you can see why that's stupid, then you're smarter than Don Batten.
1/10 the thickness of a sheet of paper, you're not going to get fossils, you're going to get complete bioturbation. It doesn't figure. The millions and billions of years story does not make sense of the physical evidence.
Just like all these stories about Duane Gish going around the world doing debates, driving in cars, flying in airplanes, riding in trains or boats, those don't make sense. When we all know he spent his whole life shambling at an incredibly slow pace from Kansas to California without ever stopping to sleep, eat, piss, take a shit, or anything else. I guess the Institute for Creation Research is actually a bunch of liars when they talk about the life of their founder.
It's another major fail for the evolutionary predictions.
Yeah, a claim that could be refuted by your average 5-year-old sure isn't a problem for science.
And with that, there's no get-out-of-jail-free card here. Like, we had some other sort of answers with the previous predictions where, there was contamination or something like that, where you had to do some refuting. But is there any sort of get-out-of-jail-free card here?
No, because there's no jail here. You don't need a get-out-of-jail-free card when the jail doesn't exist.
Well, the only one is one we mentioned, which is the idea that there's been a period of rapid sedimentation, and then there's periods of nothing happening.
Wow, you mean the solution to the problem of Duane Gish being reported as having done debates all over the place, even though we showed that he was just walking slowly across the western half of North America, is that maybe he did go do those debates and just ended up in California eventually, where he died, not having spent his entire life on a straight line between White City, Kansas and San Diego, California? I don't know. Seems pretty far-fetched to me.
It doesn't work.
That's right. ICR are dirty liars. Duane Gish stayed on that straight and narrow path from the moment of his birth until he dropped 93 years later, or whatever.
Because this study shows that there's never been a period of nothing happening.
Well, yeah, I guess there has never been a time of nothing happening. Because erosion is something which we know has happened.
Exactly.
Almost no periods of nothing happening.
Way to walk it back, Donnie. Man, Batten, Badinsky, Trump, what is it with Donalds? Anyway, after this, Jimmy the Ginger asks for the final point. Somehow, there's more to this last point in the video than there was to the second 2 points that we just covered put together. So that's weird. I guess we'll leave convergence, the last alleged failed prediction, for next time. This has been an incredibly stupid video, and I don't think I need to further explain why. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please hit like on this video and tell me what you liked in the comments. If you didn't like it, then hit dislike and let me know what the problem was. Either way, please subscribe if you haven't and turn on all notifications so that occasionally YouTube might tell you about my content if they feel like it, regardless of your wishes. And remember, if you want to support what I do, please consider joining the channel memberships or the Patreon. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Ben Tovand, Tapioca Weasel, Arrow Dodger, Dan Sheedy, Eleron Teller, Phil Rivara, Ian Chen, Joshua Geese, Kelvin Brostic Van Manen, Landed Knoll, Regios, Sphincter of Doom, The Plastic Mouse, Volis, North Texas Fossils, and John Ackerman. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.